Family, a place that should be a sanctuary of peace and connection, sometimes turns into a battlefield of endless conflicts. A well-meaning older brother paid for an extravagant vacation to celebrate their parents' wedding anniversary, hoping to create meaningful moments together as a family. But instead of appreciating the gift, his younger sister Arya turned it into a tool for control, making changes to everything according to her own desires. The breaking point came when she brazenly canceled the plane ticket of the very person who funded the trip, believing she could exclude her brother from the dream vacation. But what she didn't expect was that with just one decision, her brother would change everything, not just the trip, but the entire family dynamic. So, what really happened? Everything started when I received a generous bonus from my job. Realizing that it had been years since our family had taken a trip together, I decided to plan a vacation to Hawaii to celebrate my parents' wedding anniversary. This wasn't just an opportunity for us to spend quality time together, but also a meaningful gift for the people I love. Since I was covering the entire cost of the trip, including flights, hotels, and activities, I wanted to plan everything myself to ensure that things went smoothly and stayed within budget. When I shared this exciting news with my family, their initial reaction was overwhelmingly positive. My parents were thrilled at the prospect of a wonderful getaway. My younger brother was equally excited and grateful for the gift I was giving the family. And then there was Arya, my 24-year-old youngest sister, who also seemed excited, but instead of simply enjoying the moment, she immediately expressed a desire to take control of the trip's planning. At first, Arya eagerly talked about what she wanted to do, the photos she would post on Instagram, and the experiences she was looking forward to. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was just a burst of enthusiasm. However, her excitement quickly morphed into an obsessive need for control. Arya began insisting that she should be the one to make all the decisions regarding the itinerary, claiming that I wasn't capable of organizing a trip properly and that I should let her handle everything. Initially, I politely refused, emphasizing that since I was paying for the entire trip, I wanted to be the one to plan it. But Arya didn't take this as a suggestion. She treated it as a challenge. She started pressuring me to relinquish control. She even convinced our parents to take her side. They tried to mediate by suggesting that I could let Arya help with the planning if I was too busy, but I wasn't willing to give up complete control. This was my gift, and I had spent a lot of time researching, booking, and organizing everything to fit within my budget. More importantly, I was well aware of Arya's tendencies. When someone else was footing the bill, she never hesitated to choose the most expensive options without a second thought. But when she had to pay for something herself, she would go out of her way to cut costs. Exhausted from her relentless pushing, I decided to compromise and shared a preliminary itinerary with her. Immediately, she launched into a wave of criticism, demanding a series of changes under the pretense of making the trip more enjoyable for everyone. I agreed to a few minor adjustments for the sake of keeping the peace, but that only emboldened Arya further. Soon after, she brazenly announced in our family group chat that she had taken over the trip planning and would be making major changes. That was when I started realizing I was being gradually pushed out of my own plans. And then, just 1 week before departure, I discovered that Arya had secretly canceled several activities I had already booked and replaced them with choices that suited her personal preferences, without even informing me. When I confronted her about this, she nonchalantly responded that I should just let her make all the decisions because she had better taste and knew how to plan a more exciting trip than I did. That was the final straw. At that moment, I finally saw things clearly. This wasn't just about organizing a vacation. Arya wanted to prove that she could control me and the entire family, but I wasn't going to let that happen. After Arya blatantly changed the itinerary to suit her own preferences, I tried to stay calm and confront her. I made it clear that this trip was a gift from me to the family, and she had no right to turn it into her personal vacation. However, instead of admitting her mistake or backing down, Arya continued to resist. She outright declared that I was being too controlling, and that if I refused to compromise, I would be the one ruining the entire trip. I thought it was just an empty threat meant to manipulate the situation, but I never expected Arya to take it even further. 2 days before the trip, while I was packing my bags, I received an unusual notification from the travel agency. Your flight ticket has been successfully canceled. I froze, unable to believe my eyes. What was happening? I immediately called the ticket agency to confirm, and just as I suspected, my ticket had been canceled from my own account. There was no need to guess. I knew exactly who was behind it. I called Arya right away to confront her. What shocked me wasn't just her actions, but the way she casually responded. "Oh yeah, I did that. Isn't it funny?" Funny? I could barely contain my rage. When I demanded an explanation, Arya responded in a condescending tone. "Look, I hate to say this, but we've all talked about it. Everyone agrees that you're too negative, and if you come along, you'll ruin the whole vacation for us. We decided it's best if you stay behind, so I took care of it for everyone." I was completely speechless. Arya hadn't just canceled my ticket. She truly believed she had the authority to exclude me from a trip that I had paid for. She acted as if she was the head of the family, deciding who could and couldn't go. Anger surged through me, but instead of losing control, I decided to retaliate in a way she would never see coming. I logged into my account, quickly rebooked my ticket under my name, and changed my password to ensure no one could interfere again. Then, I promptly canceled Arya's ticket. Immediately after, I sent a message to the family group chat. Arya took it upon herself to cancel my ticket to exclude me from the trip I paid for. I have rebooked my ticket and canceled hers. If anyone thinks this is unfair and wants to stay back with Arya, speak now and I'll cancel your tickets too. The reaction was instant. My younger brother called me right away, confused about what was happening. When I explained everything, he was furious. He assured me that he had never agreed to Arya's plan and had no idea she had acted behind my back. While I was still on the phone with him, my parents called, furious that I had canceled Arya's ticket. They accused me of being petty and vindictive, but I wasn't backing down anymore. I told them directly. I planned and paid for this entire trip. If you all think I don't deserve to go, then this trip shouldn't exist in the first place. I am not going to sacrifice myself or treat this as a charity event just to be treated like this. My parents seemed caught off guard by my firmness. They tried to convince me to reinstate Arya's ticket, but I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let anyone dictate my place in the family or allow Arya to continue manipulating everyone as she had for years. As expected, Arya lost it. She sent a flood of furious messages, calling me cruel, selfish, and despicable. But instead of replying, I simply forwarded all her messages to my parents. Later, my father tried to play the peacemaker. He suggested a 3-way call where Arya would apologize to me, and in return, I would rebook her ticket. I agreed, not because I wanted to forgive her, but because I knew Arya would never humble herself enough to apologize. And just as I predicted, when my father asked Arya to apologize, she coldly replied, "Apologize to him? Not a chance." At that moment, I didn't need to say anything more. My father hung up, and for the first time, he seemed to truly understand who his daughter really was. Arya thought she could manipulate everyone like she always had. But this time, she had gone too far. Her ticket was canceled, and the trip went on without her. And that was the moment I realized Arya no longer had control. After the heated confrontation, ready to leave for Hawaii without Arya. I knew my parents weren't happy with my decision, but I no longer cared. If they truly believed Arya had the right to cancel my ticket and still deserved to go, it's clear they didn't value everything I had done for the family. However, what surprised me the most was my younger brother's reaction. As soon as he found out what had happened, he called me to make sure I hadn't misunderstood anything. He made it clear that he had never agreed to exclude me from the trip and had never even been consulted about it. In reality, Arya had lied when she claimed that everyone had agreed to leave me behind. He was furious when he realized Arya had manipulated the entire situation, turning the vacation into a tool to control both me and the family. As for my parents, they tried to remain neutral, but I could tell they felt conflicted. At first, they couldn't accept the idea of leaving Arya behind. However, when I forwarded them Arya's furious text messages, filled with profanity, insults, and blame, they started to waver. They still wanted all of us to go together, but they couldn't fully defend Arya after seeing how she reacted. In the days leading up to the trip, Arya desperately tried to convince my brother to take her side. She attempted to persuade him to refuse the trip and instead go on a separate vacation with her, an absurd plan that I was certain she couldn't afford. When my brother asked who would pay for this trip, Arya promised she would pay in installments. But both of us knew she had never been financially responsible for anything. After my brother rejected her idea, Arya turned to our parents, trying to manipulate their emotions to make them cancel the trip. She cried, claiming she was being abandoned and treated unfairly. But this time, no one fell for her act as easily as before. My parents, though still saddened that their youngest daughter wouldn't be coming, no longer pressured me to change my decision. In the end, the trip went exactly as planned, except without Arya. When we arrived in Hawaii, there was some initial tension. My parents were still struggling to fully accept the situation, but I didn't let that affect my mood. I focused on enjoying the vacation and making sure everyone had the best time possible. Gradually, as we participated in the activities I had planned, from a traditional luau feast to a breathtaking helicopter tour, the atmosphere became more relaxed. My parents started to genuinely enjoy themselves and slowly stopped dwelling on Arya's absence. In fact, after seeing how well I had organized everything, they even admitted that I had done a great job. Throughout the trip, Arya continued to send messages, mostly filled with anger and accusations. But instead of directing all of her frustration at me, she started shifting her blame toward our parents and my brother, accusing them of abandoning her as well. It was those very messages that opened my parents' eyes. They started to realize that Arya didn't actually care about the family. She only cared about maintaining control over everything. By the time the vacation ended, my parents barely mentioned Arya anymore. They seemed exhausted by her behavior, and for the first time, I noticed they weren't making excuses for her like they always had before. Maybe, at last, they were finally starting to see their youngest daughter for who she truly was. After the trip to Hawaii, I returned to my busy daily routine, but things with Arya were far from over. Even though she had been excluded from the trip, she continued to stir up trouble within the family. When she realized she could no longer manipulate me or my younger brother, Arya turned her attention to our parents, trying to win back their favor by playing the victim. At first, my parents still held on to hope that they could reconcile with Arya and bring her back into the family. They felt guilty that she hadn't been included in the trip and wanted to make it up to her by spending more time with her. However, they didn't expect that instead of trying to mend relationships or change her attitude, Arya would continue to show her selfish nature. Despite being 24 years old, Arya had never truly taken responsibility for her life. She had no stable job, frequently skipped work just because she was not in the mood, and, most importantly, she still relied entirely on our parents for financial support without contributing a single cent to the household. My parents had repeatedly urged her to become independent, but Arya always found excuses to delay it. A year ago, my parents had asked Arya to pay a symbolic amount of rent so she could learn some responsibility. However, over the course of an entire year, she only managed to pay for 3 months, coming up with a new excuse each time she was asked to pay. When my father insisted she take it more seriously, Arya lashed out, calling my parents cruel and stingy for asking their own daughter for money. Things reached a breaking point after my parents returned from the Hawaii trip. Feeling abandoned, Arya decided to turn the house into a battlefield to vent her anger. She wasn't just upset. She was openly disrespectful, constantly blaming my parents for going on the trip without her. When they tried to make peace by bringing her gifts, Arya went as far as throwing the gifts back at them and declaring that they were traitors. This time, my father had had enough. He gave Arya an ultimatum. Either she started contributing financially, or she had to leave the house. As always, Arya assumed it was just an empty threat. But when my father stood firm on his decision, she began to panic. She cried, begged, and even clung to my mother, pretending to be remorseful, claiming that she had acted that way because she was deeply hurt. But this time, my parents were no longer fooled by her tears. They had given her plenty of time to change, but instead of improving, she had only sunk deeper into laziness and manipulation. In the end, my father rented a small apartment for Arya and paid for the first 2 months, giving her time to get on her feet. This was the last financial support they were willing to give her. When Arya realized that no one was going to bail her out this time, she fell into a state of panic. Yet, even after moving out, Arya didn't change. Instead of using the money my father gave her to sustain herself, she blew it all on luxury items like shoes and designer clothes. When the rent was due, rather than taking responsibility, she returned to our parents' house, stayed for dinner, and continuously tried to freeload off them. My mother, still somewhat soft-hearted, continued to feed her and tried to help, but my father did not. When he found out that Arya hadn't paid her rent for 2 months and was entirely relying on his money, he firmly declared, "No one is going to help you anymore. If you come back here asking for money again, this door will close on you forever." That was a massive shock for Arya. For the first time in her life, she could no longer manipulate anyone. After being kicked out of the house by our parents and having no one left to rely on, Arya truly began to spiral into crisis. She couldn't return home because my father had made it crystal clear that he would no longer provide any financial support. She also couldn't turn to me or my younger brother, as we were both completely fed up with her manipulative games. However, instead of learning how to be independent, Arya continued down the same old path, finding someone else to exploit. She moved in with a friend or a coworker, but no one in the family knew exactly where she was staying. The only thing I was certain of was that if she kept up her old habits, it wouldn't be long before her roommate got tired of her and kicked her out. I didn't particularly care about Arya's situation, but my mother still kept in touch with her. My mom told me that Arya showed no remorse and made no effort to change. She continued to play the victim, blaming the family for abandoning her and refusing to help when she was struggling. But the truth was, Arya had brought this situation upon herself. Things got even worse when Arya started trying to siphon money from my younger brother again. She called him, complaining that she was about to lose her place to stay, that she had no money for rent, and that she desperately needed help. When he refused, she switched to her old tactics, asking him to borrow money from me and then pass it to her so she wouldn't have to lower herself by asking me directly. Of course, my brother wasn't stupid. He turned her down immediately and even told me about it. When Arya found out that I knew about her little scheme, she lost it. She called my brother a traitor and ranted that I was a selfish bastard who only cared about money. I just laughed. Did she really think she could still manipulate us? Everything came to a head one evening when I came home after a long, exhausting day at work. Standing at my front door was Arya, soaked from the rain, looking disheveled and miserable. She tried to put on a friendly act, greeting me in an overly sweet, obviously fake voice. "Little brother, how have you been?" I didn't say a word. I just unlocked the door and walked inside. But Arya didn't wait for an invitation. She followed me in as if she still had the right to be there. I took off my coat, set down my bag, and turned to face her. "What do you want?" I asked. At that moment, Arya dropped the act. She started rambling about how she had been kicked out of her current place and had nowhere else to go. She wanted me to talk to our parents and convince them to let her move back home. I didn't budge. I refused outright. "If you want them to forgive you, prove that you've changed," I told her. Arya didn't like that answer. She immediately flew into a rage, accusing me of being heartless, arrogant, and full of myself just because I had a stable job and money. She ranted that the only reason our family loved me was because I paid for everything. Her words didn't hurt me. They only confirmed that Arya hadn't changed one bit. I stared at her coldly and said, "Well, you're dry now. Go back outside and enjoy the rain." Arya was stunned when I kicked her out. She looked like she wanted to hurl more insults at me, but when she saw that I didn't care, she eventually left. I locked the door behind her and immediately blocked her on every social media platform. Since that night, Arya has never contacted me again. My mother told me that she still complains constantly, but this time, even our parents don't want to help her anymore. Arya pushed herself out of the family, and now no one is willing to pull her back in. Maybe one day she will change and make amends for her mistakes. But until that day comes, I want nothing to do with her anymore.